Hi everybody, my name is Simon James Gratton. I'm a principal at Capgemini Financial Services. Today I'd like to take you through why digital success needs data art, not data science. It really is a case of move over Einstein, Van Gogh is calling. We continue to hear that social data is the new oil. It's about being corporately sentimental, with the heart of tomorrow's boardroom needing to beat to the tweet of consumer intent. The construction of social oil refineries is expected to take customer experience from crude to shrewd. Yet mining data in this way is a challenge nearer to fracking than deep sea oil drilling. We have to have a perpetual focus on immediacy of response through agility of approach. In fact, David McCandless suggested that data is in fact the new soil. For data to retain its value, it needs to be farmed responsibly. You reap what you sow. You get out what you put in. Unlike oil that holds its intrinsic value, soil needs to be managed appropriately. It needs to be fertile. It needs to provide context through collaboration and combined perspectives. And it needs to be irrigated. It needs to be funded. It needs to have appropriate governance, manageable control, and most importantly, the removal of line of business barriers between your business's intelligence and the consumer that you interact with. By 2017, the mobile consumer will store personalised information in over 100 applications. Sharing of information is integral to the emerging millennial generation's psyche. Privacy, a diminishing law of averages. By 2020, there will be 50 billion smart devices connected to the internet. And that's not just computers. We can now fit cameras, sensors, and computers into a single cubic millimeter. That equates to 30 for each character of text in this presentation. The future home will have hundreds of intelligent integrators. The future city, billions of sensors. Yet, our big data capabilities remain limited, our devices overburdened and complex. What happens when we truly integrate this ecosystem? Will organizations be ready to exploit this? We are literally drowning in information. Big data is destined to increase by 4,030% by 2020. David McCandless recently said that all of us are now being blasted by information design. It's being poured into our eyes through the web, and we're all visualizers now. This means we're starting to demand a visual aspect to our information. When you're navigating a dense information jungle, coming across a beautiful graphic or a very clear and lovely data visualization, frankly, it's a relief. Data art is like coming across a clearing in the jungle. And with 0.5% of the available big data being analysed today, the emergence of art and the prevalence of data art is going to become increasingly important. We are entering an era of poor data with linear expansion, where the techniques used to acquire and marshal data today being onerously over-engineered and increasingly unreliable. 2.5 exabytes of information is created every single day, and the global data pool is doubling every 1.2 years. The modern CIO focuses on internal systems information, attempting to structure this using what's called an inside-out perspective. The CMO, often detached from the CIO, is interested in market movement and sentiment of consumers, social media, or what we call the outside-in perspective. For true insight, both data perspectives need to be harnessed in unison and in alignment against operational outcomes. Traditional companies still have no single view of their customers, have a limited view of their products, and virtually a non-existent view of ongoing relationships. The emergence of the Internet of Things is going to make things harder, as an unstructured data deluge becomes potentially more valuable for a positive digital and customer experience. To deliver context at each point of customer interaction, strategy must focus on right data rather than big data, and this is where we see the entrance of data art. Do we really need superhero data scientists? Well, in part, yes, but generally, I don't think so. Since 2010, data science has been moving progressively towards the back office. The modern data scientist or statistician is detached from customer experience and consumer outcomes. The original 3 V's of big data, that of volume, velocity, and variety of information, are increasingly becoming commodities in the data science space. The 4th V of value and the emerging 5th V of veracity sit in the space of data art. With acquisition and marshalling of information increasingly accessible to all, and the technologies increasingly open, we will need the data artist of 2014 to demystify machine-to-machine information and human-to-human information into a single context. Swede Tor Norrestanders asked, how much bandwidth is in each human sense? And he compared this with standard computer technology. The enclosed pictorial shows just how important sight is in terms of processing information. It is effectively the same bandwidth as a computer network at 1.25 gigabytes per second of bandwidth processing. Touch comes in more akin to a USB key at 125 megabytes per second. That's a tenth of that of sight in terms of bandwidth. Hearing and smell is 100th of the bandwidth of sight at 12.5 megabytes per second. This is effectively akin to a hard disk. And finally, taste is more like the processing of a pocket calculator. When we put this into context, we can see the small white dot in the bottom right-hand corner of this pictorial. This represents the senses of which you are consciously aware. The white circle is in fact the bandwidth of consciousness when it comes to senses, as we're actually only aware of around 16 bits per second. The importance of data art, given the relative amount of bandwidth in terms of sight and the processing thereof, cannot be underestimated. Therefore, it's important to consider that before we augment data with the language of the mind, we should first focus on the language of the eye. We do this by influencing the mind through our visualizations. Our eyes heavily influence our opinion. Therefore, effective interaction in terms of our systems and big data processing should prioritize this aspect. This puts data art in a completely different perspective going forward. To demonstrate this concept, I've taken an excerpt of David McCandless's presentation at TED 2010, entitled Information is Beautiful. If we look at this visual chart, what do we think this might represent? Visually, it peaks at Easter, periodically on the same day per week, and it also peaks around the end of November. The troughs appear to occur during the summer months and around Christmas and New Year. What could this be, do we think? Could it be purchases of chocolate? Some kind of retail therapy? The moments when your sports team win a match? By augmenting this visual information with one piece of context via the language of the mind, we can see that this is Facebook status relationship breakups in 2010. This gets our mind thinking as to the purpose of the peaks and the troughs. When we look at this information using our eyes and our mind in unison, we see that relationships fall down around spring, so I guess a spring clear out, repetitively on Mondays as we start the working week, and also as we enter the depths of the winter in terms of winter depression. But Christmas, New Year, and summer are generally good times for relationships. So what do we really mean by data art? Data science, of course, is the acquisition and marshalling of data and the insight therein. But this is rapidly becoming a commodity as technology reaches a tipping point in this perspective. They say a picture paints 1,000 words. I believe it could ensure your customers remain in touch. If we think of data science as the regular banking transactions, data art is the Visa card. This is because data art enables us to make sense of spend with personalised context. Data science is wedded to data assets, whereas data art will be embedded into our operational fabric, providing context at each point of consumer interaction. The Visa analogy is important. Data art is about visualization, how we see it, interpretation, why it matters, storytelling, making the information relevant, and dealing with ambiguity, making the information fit. Data art is about taking the foundation of data science and providing actionable outcomes. It's less about big data and more about right data. So data art is there to make the complex simple. It needs to be visual, emotional even, rather than accurate. Size and impact are more important than detail and accuracy. And it should focus on differences and not similarities. This mock-up of startup costs shows a standard report on the left-hand side and a relative and visual data art manifestation of the same information. It is much easier to see where the bulk of the costs are in this diagram. Equally, data art is about being instantly visual and on message. It's about making rather than describing your point. We should show only what is required. Shapes and patterns aid visual memory. And we should deliver the key message rather than describing our journey to it. This slide shows a typical presentation slide that we see in many, many business scenarios. And in reality, the right-hand side shows the fundamental point. In this case, that 38% of IBM's revenue will come from cloud services by 2015. Make rather than describe your point. Finally, data art should be visual, emotional, and contextual. It's about driving outcomes from the center, and the emerging field of infographics is a fundamental example of this representation. This example, by Learning Fundamentals, uses colors to add impact. Red, things to reduce. Green, things to increase. Highlighting key messages at the center of the visual is a critical component of relaying the message. So data art relies on 7 basic principles of effective visualization. Less is more. We should make the point rather than describing it. Show only what is required and make it relative. Visual differences should only be depicted when needed. Length or spatial representations should reflect magnitude. Visual flow and mappings will augment our memory, and we know that colour will add core impact. We should also separate the discrete. And so on to some examples of data art in action. This is a visual mapping representation of characters and their occurrence in the Bible. At the bottom, we have the frequency, the number of times the characters appear in the chapters. And then we have the mapping of the characters across chapters. This shows that characters occur many, many times in different passages of the same book. We even have data art appearing in food. And I guess with the emergence of printed food and digital machines in the physical world, future data art could be created on anything. Also, we have the emergence of physical analytics. And with 3D printing technology, touching and feeling something may well drive a more immediate understanding and indeed emotion than the current digital formats in place today. This 3D print represents server idle times on a typical Tier 1 estate. Colour has a profound effect on interpretation, and this differs by culture. Red is about power and intensity. Orange is about balance and energy. Blue means you're dependable and trustworthy. And brown, stable and comforting. And in this example, Pantones are being used to represent different types of beer beverage. Data art can also monitor machines. This example shows drones pre-programmed with LEDs to create a 3-dimensional light show shape, in this case a teapot. But in all seriousness, data art will increasingly render complex ecosystems into simple points of view. With the Internet of Everything expanding, our need to be able to simply represent what is happening in our world will become increasingly important. So not only are we concerned about machines and the Internet of Things, but also about the Internet of People. These examples of selfies and digital expressionism could provide valuable insight into target personas and target consumer profiles. To do this, we need to understand them more. And data art is a vehicle for that purpose. Finally, data art will have the potential to combine events from machines and people into consumable mass intelligence. This should drive better human-to-human outcomes. This example by NewsCloud shows the important movements in terms of political news across the globe at a given moment in time. And this is a representation on climate. And yet, technology is being fragmented at an unprecedented rate. Moore's law is being pushed. Devices will outnumber people 4-to-1 in 6 years, with thousands of interfaces in the modern institution. At a cost of £14,000 to build and £10,000 to maintain per interface, we have a legacy of brittle and fractured IT assets. Yet, increasing channels and engagement models and the prevalence of using your own device for work and play mean that omni-consistency across channels is more important now than ever before. Digital personalization is king. It's now human to human, not business to business or business to consumer. And yet, a history of quick wins in IT has built a legacy of IT silos. This fundamentally reduces business agility. On average, the same information is duplicated 7 times in each organization application store. There are hundreds of systems in a typical Tier 1 organization. The analytical focus is narrow waves, leaving a legacy of siloed tsunamis. We continue to operate at a pace of change that IT is unable to handle. The IT disconnect with the channels and marketing strategies means that IT hits walls of complexity. This fractured legacy undoubtedly equals poor customer experience. And yet, data art is a silo killer. The modern CIO suffers from what I call obsessive integration syndrome. This is a tendency to focus on inside-out integration of the entire IT landscape. Everything must be integrated, no matter what pace of business change is required. This means IT never catch up with demand. The cure to this malady requires liberal amounts of what I would like to call string theory applied to the affected business areas. By string theory, in the chart shown, we can imagine different mechanisms for simplifying applications, rules, data, and the corresponding processes. The typical integration approach or bottom-up approach drives simplification from the application upwards. Unfortunately, the complexity of rules and data and the corresponding processes, when driven from the application up, means that we push the string and it folds. It's simply too complex. If we consider data art as an outcome-based approach, and we consider a top-down approach to simplification, starting with the process and then only looking at the rules, data, and applications specific to that process, we're likely to drive a better interaction outcome. Pulling the string holds in this manner. Data art effectively reduces the need for complex integration, and it shields both consumer and employee from the underlying complexities of existing processes and IT platforms. It's less about integration and more about federated intelligence. Data art can provide decisions rather than analysis at the pace of interaction by providing in-process personalised context. And here's the point. Without data art at key points of interaction, we will simply not be able to innovate and adapt to the dynamic needs of the digital consumer. Excessive integration is too slow. Delivering personalised context at speed requires a different mindset. And this in turn will require new visual and storytelling skills in our workforce. Our cultures need to become more startup-like in nature via connected pods of activity. These pods need to be empowered. We need to service our customers to the visuals of David Gray's connected company and manage the ongoing business and product development along to the metric symphony of Eric Ries and the Lean Startup. And so we move on to the concept called the long tail of big data, which was a piece of work by C. Borgman. This simplified representation shows a cost-performance barrier against varying levels of data volume and varying levels of data complexity or expressiveness in this particular representation. In short, the cost-performance barrier line shows that to integrate all our data is too expensive and simply takes too long in reality. And yet, to analyse it all in an unstructured form is probably too risky. When we look at the realm of data science today, or that of implicit statistical analytics on the left-hand side, these are really only effective on large and relatively simple data sets. Equally, when we look on the right-hand side at explicit ontologies or cognitive approaches to data management, data analytics, these approaches are extremely good on complex data, but it has to be smaller in volume to be effective. And so now I've overlaid the concept of data art and its ability at a better cost-performance ratio to deliver an individual digital persona at each point of business interaction. By this, I'm saying that data art can deliver cost-effective digital personas on top of the data science back end without obsessive integration of the IT estate. And this concept of delivering better personal personas at the consumer coalface aligns very closely to Gartner's PACE layer strategy. In effect, data art becomes more important as we approach the agile and dynamic consumer coalface of our organisation. That's to say, it increases in importance at the systems of innovation layer. To power the new, we need to adapt to the now. And so, in this example, we see that data art is extremely well placed to provide personalised context at the systems of innovation layer. This layer requires timely context to satisfy consumer interaction. And it's a layer in which information exchange is highly dynamic and unstructured in nature. Rather than mindless integration, we need focused federation to deliver the right data at the right time. And data art is extremely well placed to deliver the right data at context, at pace. And the point regarding context, and indeed the ability to drive outcomes, takes me a step back to consider how data art and context-based decisioning fits in the BI paradigm of evolution. BI 1.0 was all about analytical delivery to the consumer. It was tool-centric. It was aimed at a local community, and more of an IT or data science profile was required to be successful in this model. It was also batch in nature and retrospective. BI2 was the web-centric approach to information provision. It was about porting creation by the consumer. This was enterprise level, across more employees, and less complex than BI1. It was for the data explorer in the organization, was more real time in process, but still required levels of web design capability in order to deliver information and visualizations to the business. BI3 is now emerging. This is more app-centric in nature and is more socially orientated and a collaboration vehicle via any device. Data art and an apps-based approach work extremely well together. The realm of data art, and that of the empowered customer, requires multi-device, outcome-specific, and social empowerment, which is not only context-aware, but enriches the customer experience process itself. The challenge for the CIO now is about how to freely release and not control the information assets inside the organization. And so, as we consider the ramifications of releasing control of our information assets, and indeed providing personalized context at key points of interaction, it leads us to the need to live the data through stories in the future. The most challenging component of digital delivery today is the greatest opportunity for digital success tomorrow. This component is ensuring we implement a human-to-human personalization strategy to remain aligned with our customers at all times. We will need to adapt like a 10 FTE startup company while still assuring like a Fortune 500 giant, and this is a critical balancing act. If we consider data usage from a revenue, cost and risk perspective, we can consider the ability to generate one additional customer at a time, looking at the interaction points of data overlap in this example. We can consider the reduction of cost through the reduction of interface complexity, in this case, what I call big trouble little interfaces. And finally, the assurance or the risk angle to provide consistent and governed focus needs to consider a concept I call mind the gap. These concepts can all be found on dedicated blogs, both on LinkedIn and on the Capping It Off website. And here lies the real challenge for data practitioners. Fast data needs fast culture, and fast culture needs data art. Fast data is here already. Our kids are always connected. Customers are making more payments through their phones. We shop online almost daily. Your show-off neighbours have a new home heating system and refrigerator that are internet enabled. Your jogging buddy is a wearables addict, monitoring just how unfit you really are. And even grandma knows how to FaceTime the family, unfortunately, at 6 a.m. in the morning. To act fast, we need to be culturally agile. It's no longer my customer, my way. It's our customer, their way. When the customer is not happy, we adapt our business based on collected fast data. We adapt fast, we adapt hard, and we adapt without prejudice against the internal problems we have identified. And yet, we find that the modern Fortune 500 company, or the physical business of today, manages performance like the aircraft cockpit of yesterday. The dials and instruments require frequent synchronization, and they rely on heavy manual intervention to provide appropriate context. Hence, we continue to fly blind whilst we expend considerable effort on perpetual calibration of our information assets. The digital business of tomorrow provides an integrated and adapted view of our customers from cradle to grave, with context captured at every point of interaction. Fewer cockpit instruments are integrated, and they are self-evident, providing not only context but future likely intent. We now focus on value-added activities, which are assured. And so we are moving towards the emergence of data art. Data science itself is still critically important, but aspects of it are rapidly becoming a commodity. We are moving from a data-centric siloed exoskeleton, or the world of the data scientist, or Einstein in this case, towards an outcome-embedded nervous system, the realm of the data artist, or in this case, Van Gogh. A data-centric siloed exoskeleton is more representative of the CIO world of today. It's a risk-averse world with a number of IT silos, a perpetual integration obsession, looking primarily at structured information, and is inside out in nature, that is, looking at the assets within the organization to make sense of the outside world. Also, the analytics and visualizations from this world are quite technical, they're complex, and they force a fixed cognitive focus, often requiring a PhD statistician to make sense of the output. In effect, 80% of our effort in this world is wedded to the data context, and this context is supplied through a shield of mathematics. The world is changing. This highly complex acquisition and marshalling, and to a certain extent some of the analysis of data in the information supply chain, is becoming more of a commodity. As technologies such as Hadoop become more mainstream in nature, and the concept of the data lake grows, our emphasis is moving more towards the analysis and action side of things, and visualization and stories are becoming more prevalent. We enter the world of the data artist. The outcome-embedded nervous system. This world is revenue optimized. The information that we provide is personalized and actionable. It's as much outside in as inside out in nature, and therefore is dealing with a federation of structured and unstructured information. The outcome focus means that the context is delivered in process at speed. This information can be highly unstructured in basis, and therefore requires complex analytics at key points of interaction with the consumer. To be ahead of the game going forward, digital organizations will need 80% of their focus to be on data art, and that is the provision of timely intelligence, consumable intelligence in short, within the context of each key customer interaction. And so, I conclude that data art will be a fundamental component in the new design for digital. This representation shows Capgemini's Technovision building blocks, in effect a blueprint for digital. And we can see 6 of these. The 2 on the left-hand side, that of invisible infrastructure and sector as a service, are back office IT components. On the right-hand side, we see you experience and we collaborate. And these effectively are the digital experience with the consumer or the employee. The points of interaction as discussed earlier. And in the middle, we have the current battleground for digital. The building blocks of process on the fly and thriving on data. What we're seeing is that as data science and data art move closer together, the reconciliation point for this inside out and outside in approach to data management is meeting at the intersection between the data assets and the processes of the modern organization. Data science increasingly will insulate operations from the underlying complexity and will deliver intelligence at each key point of interaction. Data art will provide personalised context, enable agile process adaptation, and help to deliver the required customer experience outcomes. The modern digital background is about bringing the CIO, in this case the data science bubble, and the CMO, in this case the data art bubbles, together in collaboration and unification rather than in combat. It's this paradigm that has the ability to make an organization both agile and truly effective in supplying a digital experience of the future.